Nobody expected USC not to beat Rice, but a 52-point win, 66 points on the board for the Trojans, an impressive start to Lincoln Riley's tenure and era at USC. And of course, the Pac-12 is underway now this week with USC taking on Stanford. This is our USC show that we provide for you each and every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. Matt Semick is the guy that makes it all happen. You can catch his work at Trojans Wire. Hey, Matt.
Hey, we have a game to review. How about that?
And
it's a game where, we saw things that didn't happen under Clay Helton, like USC actually playing well in the third quarter. USC fans have lived through abysmal third quarters. It was one of the bugaboos, the central bugaboos of the Helton era. And in this game, USC comes out in the third quarter and blows the doors off Rice. And the defense played well. I mean, the defense clearly made adjustments after what was not a very good first half. So Alex Grinch getting that unit to play a lot better after halftime, that's an encouraging sign. Now, for all the non-USC fans watching here on the Voice of College Football, let's be real. Crushing Rice in the second half, laying on the points, increasing your margin of victory. Like, that doesn't mean, this team's ready for the Pac-12. This team's ready for Stanford. No, it doesn't mean that. But what it does mean is the buy-in, right? It means that the attitude's better, the commitment's better, correcting mistakes. We need to see those kinds of things. Certainly, if you're a USC fan, you need to see players learning from what goes wrong, improving the effort level, watching Rice shoved around USC's defensive front in the first quarter, 16-play touchdown drive. I mean, that's as bad as it gets. Like, that was a worst-case scenario. So the defense could have sulked. No, it did not. Came out in the third quarter, played a lot harder, got the avalanche of pick sixes. That's obviously not going to happen in any other game. I mean, 3 pick sixes, that's like a once-in-a-million thing. But the effort level, like, that's the thing to focus on. Effort was there, commitment was there, adjustments were there. That's a sign of hope. I'm not going to tell you that this defense is better than expected. No, this first game against Rice should not lead to that kind of conclusion, especially the way the first half unfolded. But you see players who are coachable, who are willing to grow, willing to evolve. When they make a mistake, when they have a bad half, how did they respond? They responded well. So I'm not saying it's all sweetness and sunshine and light, but a few things that weren't part of the Clay Helton era, you can definitely see it with Lincoln Riley, with Alex Grinch in game one.
Folks, leave your comments and questions in the chat. We will get to them over the next 60 minutes. Check out Matt's work at Trojans Wire and his new podcast, Get Off My Pylon. That's at the College Gridiron Coast to Coast network that you can find on the Red Circle platform. And I will drop the link to Matt's latest there in the live chat as well. All right, Matt. So again, in looking at the performance against Rice, you touched upon the treetop look at offense and defense. Obviously, Caleb Williams, his debut, much anticipated, and the ball barely hit the ground.
19 of 22. I mean, that really says it all. What also says it all is that you had 7 different USC receivers completing a reception of 20 yards or more. USC had 9 overall plays of 20 yards or more. But the fact that the big plays came from a lot of different sources, getting everyone involved, that is a box that the Trojans needed to check in week one. And that's a very positive thing. And people will notice, not a ton of rushing yards. Travis Dye did not, make a big box score impact on this game. But what did we see from Travis Dye? His blocking, his pass protection, the blocking of the running backs and the wide receivers was excellent. And that's coaching, right? That is attention to detail. And it also speaks to getting everyone to buy in, perform a role, even if it doesn't show up in the box score. Guys are sacrificing for each other. They're good teammates for each other. Lincoln Riley had to love those kinds of contributions that didn't show up in the box score, but you can see an integrated team, a cohesive unit of 11 guys all doing things to help each other. Jordan Addison, 54 receiving yards, didn't have a monster day. Mario Williams, no one had a huge statistical buffet, other than Caleb Williams. And even then, he threw just 22 passes. And Miller Moss was able to play the whole fourth quarter. Another good thing that came from this game. So you're seeing guys not being too concerned about the stats. You're seeing guys doing what it takes to make this offense function. So even if you take away the pick sixes, USC's offense posted 45 points, and that's with, shutting things down, or at least going, downshifting in the fourth quarter under Miller Moss. So kind of jogged through this game, which was played in very hot temperatures in Los Angeles. The USC marching band was in shorts and T-shirts because of the heat, not in their full dress. So many good things from the offense. It's pretty clear that if everybody's healthy, and there were no serious injuries in week one, other than Raleek Brown, the running back who scored a touchdown, he got carted off. But running back, you have Travis Dye and Austin Jones heading up to Stanford. So if Raleek Brown can't play, that is not a significant injury. There were no injuries on the offensive line. So that's excellent. That's definitely one of the things that USC needed to have in week one. So as long as that offensive line is intact, man, this offense is going to roll. You could see it in action. If they need to score 40, 45 points against Stanford or in other Pac-12 games, the offense is capable. It's just a matter of, can the defense get enough third down stops to facilitate enough possessions for this offense to do its thing.
LP enjoyed Travis Dye's pancake block. So, yeah, doing the little things not on the box score. Folks, leave your comments and questions there, whether they be pertaining to what we saw on Saturday or what we expect to see on Saturday night. ABC game, 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific time, prime time on the East Coast against Stanford. So the USC impact seen immediately. This would not have been a primetime game under other conditions over the last several seasons, probably the last 4 seasons going back to like 2017. So we've got, and that's not Stanford. That's Stanford being a fairly worthy opponent, obviously. The Rice game wasn't going to be primetime, but that's primarily 80% USC and 20% Stanford is the selection of why this game is primetime. And so we will break down the matchup and look at Stanford here in just a second. Again, leave the comments and questions. We will get them to Matt. So, Matt, you posted an article after watching the Clemson game against Georgia Tech. 41-10 the final, misleading. Georgia Tech was in the game. It was 14-10 mid-third quarter after they scored a touchdown. So size it up for us in regards to, what does Clemson have to do with USC at this stage of the season?
Well, after week one, let's get some reactions, right? Let's make sense of what we're seeing. And I think that if USC and Clemson played on a neutral field, and by neutral field, we're not talking about Atlanta, because that's a Clemson home game. Let's say Arlington, okay? Like you go to Jerry World, that's a true neutral site game for USC and Clemson, hypothetically. If you had them play in Arlington this weekend, I like USC to win. I'd hammer USC on the money line because, look, DJ Uiagalelei, he's not fixed. They had a whole offseason to fix him, and they didn't fix him. Now, of course, a lot of that goes to the Clemson offensive line not being very good. It's not entirely Uiagalelei's fault. But in terms of a USC versus Clemson comparison, like if you're thinking about a matchup that's going to give USC problems, what's that kind of matchup? It's a matchup where you're going up against a team with a great offensive line that can expose USC at its weakest point, which is the defensive front. Clemson doesn't have that. You obviously want a quarterback who can exploit USC's defense. Clemson doesn't have that, provided that we assume Uiagalelei gets the start, plays the first 1.5 quarters or first half. Now, if we assume that Cade Klubnik comes in and he changes the dynamic, all right, I might have to revise the whole script. But Dabo Swinney has said, he did say after the Georgia Tech game, DJ is still his starter. So if we go by that, so USC playing Clemson this weekend, I didn't say neutral field in November. I didn't say neutral field in October. This weekend, if Uiagalelei is starting and you have that mediocre Clemson offensive line, how many points is Clemson going to score against USC? Not 30. And if you're not scoring 30 against USC, you're not winning. And now the retort will be, and it's pretty reasonable, Clemson has an excellent defense. So Clemson might be one of the few teams in the United States that could really do damage to Caleb Williams, might be able to sack him several times, might be able to make his life miserable. And you have all these new pieces on the USC roster, and you get Clemson punching USC in the mouth, and things could really go south for this offense. But USC's starting offensive unit is a top flight offensive unit. And so even though Clemson will get its share of defensive plays and defensive stops, USC is going to hit some chunk plays. USC is going to hit Jordan Addison over the top. USC is going to get Travis Dye in a one-on-one matchup. Even against a very good Clemson linebacker, Dye is going to get his share of yards. Also, Austin Jones as well. These are capable players who, even if they're not playing great, should be able to put up 28 points. Clemson going to score 28 points against USC's defense? I mean, USC's defense is not good, but again, Clemson is not built now to exploit USC's weaknesses on defense. So if you played them now in a genuinely neutral setting, I do like the USC Trojans.
Uiagalelei got off to a horrendous start. He fumbled on the first drive. He was under siege. He didn't handle the pressure well. When he did have time to throw, they formed an approach in the passing offense that we saw repeatedly last year, where they tried to give him easy throws to make. He made the ones that basically every quarterback in the country would make, and he missed on some of those. He got progressively better, more comfortable. They started to open things up to a certain extent. There's one drive in particular in which they hit some downfield shots. Cade Klubnik came in late in the game. Now, if Cade Klubnik shows what he showed on that drive, if he does that when the game's on the line, so it's 34-10, pressure's off. Obviously, the opponent's only so good. We don't think they're very good at this point. We'll see how good Georgia Tech is specifically on defense the rest of this year. Shoot, last night they looked like a pretty damn good defense, but they're probably not.
They're probably not. That's correct.
Clemson's ineptitude on offense. But Cade Klubnik came in, and not only did he throw the ball better, tighter spiral, on target, he just looked comfortable. They're rolling him out. He's firing on the run. He's hitting guys in stride. He just made it look easy. So
he did. And I think what really adds to the nuances of this conversation is if Klubnik had come in like midway through the third quarter and we saw him play well for a quarter and a half, substantial minutes, not just one mop-up drive at the very end, the contours of this conversation would be different. But because he just came in at the very end and the game had become a blowout and the morale of the Georgia Tech defense, was just shattered, it's kind of an in-between reality in terms of how much value we place on Klubnik. But, I would have to think, Clemson's playing Furman and Louisiana Tech the next few weeks. So that Klubnik's going to get some action there. And by the end of September, beginning of October, Klubnik could be the guy. But I just return to the thesis of if they played this weekend, now, that was in the title of the story. USC's better than Clemson right now. I stand behind that because with Uiagalelei against Caleb Williams, it's another comparison akin to what I've been saying with USC and Oregon. Oh, and hello, Ducks fans. You got the Bo Nix experience right out of the gate in week one. So, Bo Nix versus Caleb Williams, Uiagalelei versus Caleb Williams. When you have a Grand Canyon size difference like that, it matters. Now, Klubnik might be able to completely change the dynamic. But right now, since Uiagalelei is still the starter, give me Lincoln Riley over Dabo if the two teams met this weekend.
All right. I'm still leaning Clemson. I don't think it's a ridiculous claim to make. I completely get your point. I completely get your point.
But
I watched Clemson struggle for the most part on offense yesterday. So I completely get the point. I don't necessarily buy into it completely. I think it would be a stellar elite matchup to watch USC's offense take on Clemson's defense. That would be phenomenal. I will say this. The Clemson quarterback situation, of course, this is a USC show, so we'll keep it focused here. But just to make this point, I don't liken it to Cade McNamara and JJ McCarthy. They're both capable. McNamara is limited, but he's capable. We've seen it. We've seen enough. He didn't have a good game Saturday, but we've seen enough. He's capable. McCarthy could turn out to be a superstar. Uiagalelei, I would normally say if for example, in the Michigan situation, they're playing cream puffs. What can we tell? Uiagalelei, if look at his game log from last year, he didn't play well against anyone. The UConns of the world held him to 45% passing percentage. So in these next 2 weeks, Furman and whomever else you named the next week,
Louisiana Tech.
Yes, Louisiana Tech. We may, by the end of that sample size, may have a new starting quarterback at Clemson, possibly.
Yeah, I think so. Unless Uiagalelei, finally gets into a groove and lights people up, you're going to see that change because, like, these next 2 games, it's the final prove it session for Uiagalelei. Like we're giving you these 2 cream puff games to get your house in order, and if you don't, I think a change is coming just around the bend. I think that's pretty obvious.
Ed Rogers is asking if Bryson Shaw played. He was not, he didn't make the box score, so he didn't register a tackle in the game. I don't know if
they rotated lots of bodies in. So, but yeah, it didn't make a real imprint. That's for sure. But, not a particularly worrisome thing just in terms of Bryson Shaw specifically, because you had so many guys in the secondary making plays. I mean, we had Kalen Bullock with the 92-yard pick 6, and you have Mekhi Blackman back there, and Gordon also came up with an interception. So you had a lot of different guys in the secondary making plays. And the secondary, I mean, part of this is because the secondary doesn't have as much in the way of run support or pass rush responsibilities as the defensive line or the linebackers. And those are the 2 things where USC's whole team really needs to improve dramatically. Pass rush and rush defense. But the secondary still was by far the best unit of the 3 units on USC's defense in this game against Rice. And obviously we'll get to see this USC secondary against Tanner McKee and Stanford. And, when we talked with Stanford's play-by-play guy, Scott Rice, in the offseason here on the Voice of College Football, what did we say? So we were kind of transitioning into a USC Stanford X&O preview. Rice felt that Stanford might, attack the USC secondary early in the game. David Shaw likes to pound the ball. He likes to pound the rock, but seeing the weaknesses in the USC secondary, Stanford might try to throw early, try to poke and probe USC down the field, get a lead, and then with a lead, run the clock, establish the run, keep the ball away from Caleb Williams. It remains fascinating in terms of the tactical approach of David Shaw going into this week 2 game. Is he going to try to get the quick lead and then run the ball to protect it? Or is he going to try to keep the ball away from Caleb Williams the whole 60 minutes and get into like 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, and trust that his offense can get 3rd down conversions against a USC defense where 3rd down conversions allowed was a real problem in the first half against Rice, not being able to get off the field consistently before improving in the second half. In the first half, that was a real issue.
Yeah, we can't glean a whole lot from Stanford's 41-10 win over Colgate. Tanner McKee did go 22 for 27, so much like Caleb Williams, the ball barely hit the ground, 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. The good Stanford teams over the past 12 or 13 years, you would think would have taken the approach that Matt outlined to just pound, set up the play action pass, because the running game and the offensive line was superior to the quarterback normally. Now we've got a situation where the star of the team is the quarterback. and the other facets of the offense have to be proven. So that will be interesting to see what kind of approach they take there. Leave your comments and questions here at the Voice of College Football on our USC show that we deliver each and every Tuesday at 1 Pacific time. Oscars has a question here. If USC scores 50 points and the defense allows only 21 points, we are the nation start to see USC as the national.
Will the nation, I think. Will the nation start to see USC? Yeah. I mean, if that's replicated on a consistent basis against good teams, no doubt. But like if USC beats Stanford 50-21, it's Stanford. No disrespect to Stanford, but Stanford is coming off a 3-9 season. So just in terms of national resonance, there won't be really significant buzz in terms of that level. Although, I mean, a decisive win certainly would move the ball in the right direction. But we don't know what Stanford is like. We don't know how good Stanford really is. So, it's really hard to say what this week 2 could do. I think the main thing for USC, just win. Just get a win on the road in Lincoln Riley's first conference game. I don't think the style points have to be great. And I'm on record as saying that, if there are some rough edges, get them out of the way now. Like, this is the time where you want to win without being at your absolute best, firing on all cylinders, because these players who, seem to be very coachable, very open to what Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch are telling them, you want them to be sponges. You want them to be receptive to learning. And so if USC absolutely drills Stanford, I mean, I'm not going to complain about it, but just might feed a little bit of overconfidence heading into Fresno State and then that big game against Oregon State in week 4. I do want USC to taste a little bit of adversity. Now, it tasted a very tiny bit of adversity against Rice in the first quarter, but it was only the first quarter, and Caleb Williams was doing so well on offense. The game never, ever, ever in doubt. Maybe there will be a slight pinch of doubt in this game against Stanford on Saturday with, Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit, or not Fowler. He's going to be calling the U.S. Open final, but with, a primetime announce crew. It'll be interesting to see if USC does have like a slightly sticky situation. Like maybe it's a 14-10 game at halftime. The offense is stuck in the mud a little bit. It'll be interesting to see if there is some adversity, how USC responds to it.
You mentioned Oregon State. They put together a much better effort than Vegas expected, blowing out Boise State. It was a 24-0 game at one point. They cruised on to a 17-point win. So Oregon State, one of the few members of the Pac-12 that showed out, probably with the best performance outside of Arizona's performance, defeating San Diego State by 18 points. That caught me off guard. And you can catch Matt's new podcast that uploads, I believe, every Tuesday, correct?
Absolutely.
Every Tuesday.
So in this week's episode, we talked about Utah versus Florida, and we talked about Oregon versus Georgia, the main games. We reviewed them on Get Off My Pylon. To transfer back to Oregon State, one of the things I wrote at Trojans Wire Tuesday morning is that Boise State really helped out USC. Now, how does that compute? How does that work? So Boise State just played an absolutely awful game. And you had the scene of Boise State, and Coach Andy Avalos trotting out Hank Bachmeier, the senior quarterback who's been there forever. And he has a terrible start, and he gets yanked right away for a much younger quarterback. A total panic move by Avalos. And that game just snowballed on Boise State, whose offense was absolutely abysmal for 2.5 quarters. So how does Boise State help USC and Lincoln Riley? It's because Boise State gave Oregon State nothing in terms of like, this is preparation for the USC offense. Like there's nothing you can go on. There's nothing you can use as kind of a tool of, well, based on this Boise State film, here's the adjustments we can make against USC. Boise State left Oregon State with nothing to use in terms of preparation for USC. So Boise State basically wasted a week of preparation for Oregon State. Now, I'm not saying like, oh, this means USC is naturally going to win. I do think, and I've been on record as saying this, Like, this is the thorny game that USC has to survive. It's going to be tough. It's going to be, a battle for 60 minutes. But, like, if you're a USC fan, this is the point. If you're a USC fan, you're looking at that Boise State, Oregon State game, you're going, Oregon State really didn't get that tough battle with a lot of things to think about that will really sharpen the Beavers for USC. All in all, if you look at that game, you're going, Boise State really did not help Oregon State in terms of year-long development. The Broncos offense was so bad. And might I add, Mark, as just kind of a sidebar comment here, Andy Avalos looks totally out of his league at Boise State. And if that situation does not get rectified, he is going to be on the hot seat sooner rather than later in Boise.
We not only have USC content here for you live with Matt each and every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. We've got USC postgame with Tim and Tony, and also Rick delivering USC postgame. And when USC's at home, which won't be this Saturday, but was this past weekend, Tim delivers his analysis straight from the Coliseum. So great stuff from Tim and Tony in particular. Rick joins them occasionally on a USC postgame right here at the Voice of College Football. So remember that. You got your notification if you subscribe, and make sure that you join us for postgame right after USC Stanford.
And I listened to that postgame show. Tony and Tim and LBC Trojan did a fantastic job. It was a heck of a lot of fun.
Yes, they do. They pulled that together a few weeks before the season started, and I was like, yeah, that is phenomenal. Get after it. I know that this is going to be good stuff for sure. All right. In terms of the, before we get, well, I guess we'll go to the chat since we do have a question coming back in from Oscar. Does the Utah loss hurt the strength of schedule for USC in the committee's eyes?
It does, but here's the thing. What matters for USC is winning USC's games. Like, that's the focus right now. And so we shouldn't get into a mindset of playoff or bust, or like the playoff is the focus of the season. The focus of the season is USC winning games, establishing the elite standard, getting back to where the program was on Pete Carroll. I mean, eventually surpassing it. But this year it's like, it's getting back to where we were. That's the theme for USC. So now, hopefully, Oscar, in late November, we're going to be talking about this kind of thing a lot more. We're going to be weighing, all the various pressure points, seeing how much all these things matter. But right now, it's about beating Stanford. It's about getting that first Pac-12 win, going on the road, taking care of business, growing as a team, and then being ready to handle that big challenge in Corvallis. Utah is off a month and a half in the future. It's that game in Corvallis. Like, Oregon State should have the total respect of this USC team, and it's first about going to Stanford. But really, in terms of thinking beyond 1 week, it's not about the playoff. It's not about Notre Dame. It's not even about Utah. It's about being ready for September 24 in Reser Stadium. I can't begin to emphasize enough how important that Oregon State game is for USC this year.
Yeah, it's always fun to talk about. We can never start playoff talk. We talk it all off season, but to Matt's point, legitimate playoff talk, talking about real scenarios, won't come until maybe 3 weeks to the end of the season, something in that range. Again, we can talk about any kind of scenarios you guys want to talk about, but it's all fictitious, and it means nothing until USC wins this week, goes to Corvallis. Then they've got a little bit of footing starting at that point, a little bit of a base of a resume, something to go on.
Yeah. Hey, Connor Johnson, great point. Comparing how the teams handle Fresno State could give us an idea of, when Oregon State and USC play. Yeah. Oregon State plays Fresno State this week. USC plays Fresno State the week after. So yes, that's going to be a great film room comparison for us, for Lincoln Riley, for Jonathan Smith. Absolutely. Fresno State is about to play both Oregon State and USC before the Trojans and Beavers meet. So an excellent point right there. And we should note that Fresno State struggled against Cal Poly. That was a struggle bus game. I caught a small snippet of it this past Thursday. So we'll see if Fresno State was just kind of, getting the rust out, going through the motions, or if Fresno State's a lot worse than I think a lot of people expect.
Larry says that Lincoln Riley always loses games he's not supposed to. Okay, before Matt cuts loose on this one, my 2 cents is basically number one, if you're an elite head coach of an elite program, basically almost any game you lose until you match up against another elite is a game you're not supposed to. So unless you're winning 100% of your games, you're losing. Take Nick Saban, lost back-to-back years to Ole Miss, fill in the blank, Texas A&M last year. Urban Meyer losing to Michigan State in various pitfalls to Purdue and Iowa, but they're winning 90+% of their games. Everybody loses games they're not supposed to lose. Yes, Lincoln Riley had a few of those, but it was a 65-game resume with only 10 losses at Oklahoma.
Couldn't have said it better, Mark. The only other thing I'd add is that as a head coach, Larry, Lincoln Riley has never lost more than 2 games in a season. And so he has lost a few games that he's not supposed to. Iowa State, Kansas State when he was at Oklahoma. But he doesn't lose many of them. He loses some, but not many of them. So if you're looking at a coach who really slips on the banana peel and squanders opportunities, that's really kind of the underlying intent and meaning behind the phrase, he loses games he's supposed to win. You wouldn't put Lincoln Riley anywhere close to the forefront of the list. You'd go to a program like, say, North Carolina State. And North Carolina State was lucky to get away with a win over East Carolina. That is the classic example in terms of a school. I'm not talking about Doran specifically, though obviously he shares in North Carolina State's history. But North Carolina State, one of only 4 Power 5 programs, which has never gone to a New Year's Six Bowl, formerly BCS Bowl, formerly Bowl Alliance Bowl Collision, 1980s New Year's Day bowl games. Rutgers, Vanderbilt, South Carolina are the other 3. So that's an example of losing games you're supposed to. That North Carolina State always seems to lose that one extra game, which makes the difference between the Gator Bowl and a New Year's Six Bowl. So in terms of when we think about examples of certain constructs, certain realities, you don't go right to Lincoln Riley. You go to North Carolina State. Other examples in that vein.
Texas since 2009.
Yes, definitely. Another great example.
And the point I'll make on the NC State game, the differentiation I make between a team that's supposed to win and handle an opponent that struggles throughout the game, but makes the plays, and they're still considered maybe lucky or fortunate, but they made plays to win the game, versus you use the term lucky, because NC State did nothing to alter those 2 kicks that were missed. You and I, Matt, could have been on NC State's special teams during those 2 kicks and just stood there and held our hands up. The guy just missed the kicks. They were gifted that win by East Carolina. It's not like they blocked a kick like Florida State did, or they made some kind of outstanding strip sack with the game on the line. That's pulling a game out of the fire because your athletes made the plays when they needed to, even in an underachieving, underwhelming performance overall.
Yep. The very simple thing here is that sometimes you win a game, other times the opponent loses the game. And East Carolina lost that game more than North Carolina State won it. And we're not trying to be mean to North Carolina State. It's just that the ball was in the opponent's hands and the opponent flubbed it. Then sometimes games are decided like that. And sometimes you need luck like that to win national championships. We've seen plenty of examples of that in past years, like the flea kicker with Nebraska and Missouri, Matt Davis, and some just crazy things happening. Sometimes you need to be insanely lucky. And North Carolina State did get insanely lucky, but that doesn't change the reality that it was more about what the opponent failed to do than what North Carolina State did positively. No question about it. And that does shape perceptions.
Merging luck, North Carolina State, and national championships into the same sentence in 2016 NC State missed a chip shot 30-yarder against
Kyle
Clemson.
Bambard, baby.
Yes, that would have been a second Clemson loss. They would not have won the ACC and gone to the college football playoff to win a national championship, and they did absolutely nothing to alter that kick. They just lucked out.
Absolutely. Hey, LBC Trojans, so part of the team with Tony Altomore and Tim
Yes.
Brangley in the USC postgame show Saturdays here on the Voice of College Football. Looking forward to seeing how David Shaw schemes against a Lincoln Riley team. Will Shaw have the same success as he did against that other USC coach? Well, he was scheming against Clay Helton, but he was also scheming against Clancy Pendergast, who was not a very good defensive coordinator. And so really you get an upgrade. You get a significant upgrade with Alex Grinch relative to Clancy Pendergast. But, for me, I mean, I know I'm beating a drum, but hey, it's week 2 of the season. We don't have too much of a sample size to go on. One game against Rice is not, it's not going to significantly shift how we think about USC. So it really comes down to, will that USC defensive front stand up physically to Stanford's offensive line? And we can evaluate where Stanford's offensive line is in its own evolutionary arc, its own stage of development. But it all starts with USC's defensive front putting up a fight, making a stand. If that happens, USC wins, period. Like, there's no path to victory for Stanford if USC's defensive line plays well, period. Stanford has to assert itself in that matchup, win that matchup. If it does, then you can imagine Stanford winning in a number of different scenarios, whether it's throwing the ball down the field, Tanner McKee getting a million years to throw in the pocket, or just by shoving the ball between the tackles and keeping Caleb Williams on the sideline. But if USC's defensive front can at least play Stanford's offensive line to a draw, Stanford has no place to go, no place to hide. That defense is not going to shut down Caleb Williams if USC gets enough possessions and enough time of possession in this game. Stanford's offensive line has to clearly win the matchup against USC's front four. That is the epicenter of this game in the Bay Area.
I'm simply interested to watch Tanner McKee play because of Stanford's issues the last couple of years. I got to say, besides highlights and checking in on a game for a drive or two, I've not seen a whole lot of Tanner McKee myself, and the NFL scouts love him. So this might be the best quarterbacking matchup that USC is going to face this year.
Yes, and we've seen Stanford put other quarterbacks in the NFL. Davis Mills was a top 70 pick. I think that was a lot higher on the draft board than a lot of people were prepared to expect. And he's actually looked competent in the NFL. He has lived up to his draft pick, if not exceeded his draft pick in terms of what he's done with the Houston Texans. So, and David Shaw knows what he's doing. And David Shaw is a credentialed coach. Obviously hasn't had Stanford at the top of the mountain the past few years the way he did from 2011 through 2015 when he took over from Jim Harbaugh and maintained a very elite standard at Stanford. But he knows what he's doing with quarterback development, and that's certainly something that has to worry USC.
So Stanford was down for the better part of a decade, going back to when they went to the Rose Bowl against Wisconsin in '99. Jim Harbaugh resurrects the program, hands it to David Shaw. David Shaw maintains it. And, I know some people out there forget who, during all this realignment and expansion talk, kind of discard Stanford. We're only looking at 3 years of down football at Stanford. They kind of leveled off. They went from a top 5 to 10 status there under Harbaugh and early in Shaw's tenure to more in the 9-3, 8-4 range, and just continued to depreciate. And what do you think has happened to David Shaw's one of the most respected coaches in college football, both for what he's done on the field, but also the type of learned and measured human being that he is, and ethical and so forth. So what do you think has happened to the Stanford program the last 3 to 4 years?
Well, I think the thing that really stands out is the pandemic, right? And the strict COVID guidelines that you have in the counties and the localities, the municipalities enfolding Palo Alto, Berkeley, the larger Bay Area, that's different from what you've had in other college football localities and marketplaces across the country. It's been very difficult to recruit. It's been very difficult to get action in the transfer portal. Now, you could say Stanford was not great in 2019 before the pandemic. And I would just say in terms of that, like if you're making that very specific point pre-pandemic, the recruiting did drop off. And I would say that, when you look at the quarterbacks that Stanford had after Andrew Luck, like Kevin Hogan, he was very much in the Jay Barker mold as a quarterback, would not light it up statistically, but like he'd make the clutch play. But the point of emphasis is Shaw was working with a quarterback who was no longer Andrew Luck. He had a much smaller margin for error. He had to rely on his defense with those teams. Those defenses were the central reason that Stanford did make and win Rose Bowls. Stanford was able to shut down Chip Kelly in high stakes late season games, including in Eugene. And so as soon as the quarterback quality and the skill position quality, at QB and receiver, you still had Bryce Love, you still had more Heisman standouts at running back, but QB and receiver dropped off. And, that's what allowed Stanford to deteriorate in quality. And then we had the pandemic, which, again, had a very chilling effect on both Stanford and Cal in terms of what they were able to achieve as a program.
If USC postgame after the game, check us out, Tim, Tony, and Rick. USC postgame here at the Voice of College Football after USC Stanford. So it's a small sample size, but that's what we have to deal with in college football in general. Small sample sizes. It's not Major League Baseball. So Utah, Florida. If you look down the list, it's most of the teams in the big games that give us the more meaningful results this past weekend played teams that were a good measuring stick. Of course, Utah and Oregon at the top end, but even the Oregon State on the more positive end of things. Arizona, certainly the surprise result of the weekend, in my estimation, if you didn't really lock in on the improvements that they made with, I think, 50 different players, new players on the Arizona roster. So what are your thoughts about the Pac-12 today that may be different than 4 or 5 days ago?
It has to start with Arizona. Arizona won only one game last year, and Jed Fish recruited well, did all the off-field things well. What was left? Coach them up on game day, make the talent come together, fit the pieces of the puzzle. We saw that against San Diego State. Now, I would say very briefly, as a slightly cautionary note, that the Mountain West is horrible, or at least the Mountain West had an absolutely atrocious week one. Boise State no-showed. You saw Colorado State get absolutely crushed by Michigan. Just throughout the Mountain West, just lots of underperformance in that conference. So maybe San Diego State is not going to be a very good team this year, which means that Arizona State's blowout of the Aztecs might not mean as much. Cautionary note. But that said, no one was expecting this, right? No one was expecting Arizona to dominate San Diego State. And of course, this was the first game in San Diego State's new stadium. So the Aztecs had plenty of reason to be super motivated for this game. Our new home, we lived a nomadic existence last year in the Los Angeles area. Now we're back in our crib. It's our new house, big day. CBS was there. Gary Danielson was there. Big occasion for that program. And Arizona just crunches them. So I put stock. I put plenty of stock in what Arizona did. Arizona was clearly more physical. Arizona was clearly more precise, had a good line of attack. Arizona had big boys. Like Arizona had the better, more physically imposing, athletic players throughout each roster. And one of the few San Diego State touchdowns was on a classic football follies punt off the back of the upman's derriere. Like that's what San Diego State needed to score. So it wasn't just offense either. It wasn't just Arizona's offense looking far better with Jaden Delora at quarterback. The defense kept San Diego State under wraps. So this was a complete performance. It's not as though it was just one or two guys. Everything came together for Arizona. And so Jed Fish certainly convinced me that, all right, he has everything working for him in Tucson. So USC has to go to Tucson later this year. I thought, okay, piece of cake, before the season, piece of cake. You don't have to worry at all about this game. Now, that could get a little thorny if USC is not supremely vigilant. So Arizona, definitely the big game changer in the Pac-12 coming out of week 1.
Back to this one straight ahead at 4:30 Pacific time on Saturday on ABC. Ruben says, I know they're saying, meaning Vegas, USC is favored by 10.5. I saw a line of 9 on ESPN's site, whatever service they use. Realistically, how do you see this game going? Do you think they will cover?
Yeah, frankly, so, I'm going to tell it to you straight. I would stay away from this game. I would not touch this game with a 39.5-foot pole. I mean, you can very easily see USC winning by 31, but you can also see Stanford punching USC in the mouth early in the game, bleeding the clock. USC panics a little bit, is kind of scratching and clawing, trying to get control of the game in the third quarter. Caleb Williams tries to do a little bit too much. I can see any and all scenarios for this game. I can see Stanford winning. Doesn't mean I expect Stanford to win. I don't, but I can certainly see Stanford winning. Now, I don't think that Stanford has all the horses to keep up with USC over 60 minutes. I have to see Stanford's offensive line prove itself and be able to establish true physical superiority. That I don't know that about Stanford just yet. Also, I would say that USC playing this Stanford team early in the season, probably a benefit for the Trojans, because David Shaw did bring in a great recruiting class, but that recruiting class needs some time to gel. It needs some time to mesh. So playing Stanford in late October, I think you would get a better Stanford team, more fully equipped to win this game. So lots of different moving parts here, but I would say stay away from this game if you really are considering betting on it. Maybe you do a live bet. Like if Stanford gets a 10-0 lead, then you might get USC +4 live. That would be something to really ride on. I think USC wins by about 10 points. I think that is where I see this game going. I think Stanford will have a few successful drives early against USC's unproven defense. Caleb Williams is going to keep pace. And then in the third quarter, you're going to see, the USC offense continue to do what it does. And Tanner McKee is going to have to keep up in a shootout. And that is not a game that David Shaw likes to play. So I'd say USC, something in the area of 34-24, maybe 37-27, something in that range for Saturday night on ABC.
Matt, while college football fans look at USC and think rivals UCLA, Notre Dame. When they go to Stanford, it's obviously Cal and Stanford. And then secondarily, in terms of because of the status of the two programs and them running into each other for North Division championships, Stanford and Oregon for roughly a decade. But this one has a ton of history, and it's an interesting matchup, and there's a lot of vitriol between the two.
Yeah, I mean, one of the, for younger college football fans, it's worth noting, Stanford made 2 consecutive Rose Bowls to interrupt the John McKay dynasty in the early 1970s. USC was the thing in Western college football. You had O.J. Simpson, winning the national title in 1967, making the Rose Bowl, which was a 1-versus-2 national title game against Ohio State in the 1968 season. In 1969, USC goes back to the Rose Bowl, beats Bo Schembechler in Schembechler's first Rose Bowl game, and USC finished in the top 3 in the polls that year. So 67, 68, 69, USC is just rolling along, dominating Western college football. And then you have a guy named Jim Plunkett who comes onto the scene at Stanford, and Stanford wins 2 straight Rose Bowls, beats Ohio State one year, beats Michigan another year. So Stanford beat Woody and Bo back-to-back before you had then USC retaking control in the West, retaking control in the Pacific 8 Conference with its 1972 team, which I would say is the greatest single-season USC team of all time. So, that's a part of the larger history of USC and Stanford, that Stanford walked into the middle of a great dynasty, busted it up for a couple years before John McKay came back better than ever and won 2 more national championships.
Tim is noting the 2007 game that cost USC a national championship, or a shot at the national championship.
And the greatest point spread upset in college football history, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken.
Yeah, the 41, I believe, was the line on that one.
Yep. Pete Carroll played an injured John David Booty. He had that busted thumb, and probably shouldn't have done that, but he did, and the rest is history. What's your deal?
Folks, we talk USC football with all of you each and every Tuesday, 1 Pacific time, 4 on the East Coast, and please join us every Tuesday for USC football talk. Leave the comments and questions there. We join you for an hour each week. Come back next week, of course, but also bring a friend or 2 or 50 with you. And Matt, where do you typically, besides, of course, on Patreon, we've got Matt, we've got other media contributors who I deliver to them a 12-pack of games. They have no say over this. I just deliver the 12 games to pick straight up and against the spread. And Matt, I believe you had a nice little week last week. I don't have the numbers at the top of my head, but I added them up.
I can't say I was keeping track. I was just so busy at Trojans Wire making sure that we nailed the post-game coverage.
But so you can get Matt and other media contributors here at the Voice of College Football, their picks and mine as well, if you join us on Patreon and search Mark Rogers TV to sign up there, and you get into our Discord as well. All right. Anything else on the docket that you think we need to get to before we wrap up?
Oh, I just want to say, folks, come to Trojans Wire. I hope that you enjoyed our coverage of the Rice game this past weekend, and putting out a report card, grading the various USC position units, a USC notebook. Like, we've gone through dozens of players and looked at the team and its various components. We also look at Pac-12 power rankings. And Mark, you'll be happy to know this, that we rankings ought to be done in terms of what teams have actually accomplished. So that means, you don't go by reputation. You don't go by end of season projection. You go by what teams have actually accomplished. So in Trojans Wire's, my first Pac-12 rankings of the season published over the weekend, Arizona is the number 1 ranked team in the Pac-12. Like, Arizona gets more credit for what it did at San Diego State than what USC did it against Rice. So Arizona is currently the number 1 team. So no one should be freaking out about it. This is how rankings are supposed to work. Mark Rogers and I are educating you on how college football rankings should be done throughout a season. This is the value of the Voice of College Football, and why you need to be liking, subscribing to, and sharing the Voice of College Football, the USC channel, all the team channels, and telling your friends about it. And for USC fans, getting on board with the post-game show this Saturday after the Stanford game around 8 p.m. Pacific with Tony Altimore, Tim Prangley, and LBC Trojan. You definitely want to be there on the Voice of College Football.
Matt has just delivered a grade A promotion there. I may clip that off and send that all over the place because you know what you're going to get hit with, Matt. I don't know what your approach to rankings has been in the past, or if you're delivering.
Always that. It's always what you have actually done.
Yes, it's an education for everyone, because you're going to get, you already know the deal. You're crazy. Arizona's not the best team in the Pac-12. We're not saying Arizona is the best team in the Pac-12. We're saying the best resume to date.
Best resume. What they've earned, what they've deserved. Yes, like, no one's expecting Arizona to be the best team in the Pac-12 in October, in November, at the end of the season. It's just right now. And here's the great thing about it. It changes every week. So, like, we're not operating in that mindset where, if you're the preseason number 1 team and you keep winning, you stay there no matter what. That is not, an actual use of the intellect. That's not an actual observation of what's happening with all these moving parts that are part of every college football season. Rankings are supposed to change each week. That's how it's supposed to work. It's not how it works. Teams get their spot and they stay there. You mentioned the example of 2004, where Oklahoma and USC were right there. Auburn, because it was 19 before the season started, the voters would not elevate Auburn. Now, we can debate whether Auburn should have been in the top 2, But Mark, your structural analysis is entirely correct that because two teams were at the top and another team was far down the list, the rankings didn't change at the end of the season. That's not how they're supposed to work. It's if you've done more than the other guy, you get ranked higher this week. But then next week, we can do it. We look at a fresh landscape. If you've stumbled and another team does well, rankings change week to week. That's how they're supposed to work. And we want smarter, more informed fans. And we're not criticizing fans, by the way. It's because the national media, national polls, the way things have been done on a broad, commercialized national level. Also think about the Heisman Trophy as well, with Bryce Young winning an award when he was not one of the top 5 or even 10 best players in college football last year. There were 10 players better than Bryce Young was. When the media shoves these narratives down your throats, you need to look differently. You need to look at Mark Rogers and the voice of college football. You need to look at evaluating everything with a fresh worldview every week. That's how rankings are supposed to be done. That's how player evaluations for the Heisman are supposed to be done. Everything fresh each week. I think that, Subway needs to be our sponsor here on the Voice of College Football. Everything fresh.
You've made a connection.
That would really work out for us.
And just to underline, I know you've already made this point, but it may have gotten lost in there. So Matt's not just talking about, okay, each and every week we look at that week's game. And so let's say Iowa's 5-1, and then they had a nice game and they beat this team. No. If you're really doing your homework and not doing the lazy man's approach to this, which is, i.e., the coaches poll and the AP poll, no, you have to reevaluate all those previous games because some of those really good wins against a number 2 ranked Penn State team for Iowa at the time, way back. Well, Penn State's later in the season, they're like a 6-4 team. They're not the Penn State we thought they were. And there's a million examples, of course, of that.
Yeah, that's right. So beating a top 5 team at the time of the game is a completely different animal from beating a team that is top 5 at the end of the season, having played 12 games, having built an elite resume. Totally different creatures.
Ohio State, of course, I've saved myself some amount of ridicule just by Ohio State playing a top 5 team and Notre Dame, a quality opponent, week 1, because had they beaten Toledo, and they may not even be ranked, I would be just getting blasted because I've experienced it in the past, as you have as well. We dropped the link to Trojans Wire in the chat, everyone, and I'll drop it here again because it may be 100 comments past at this point, but it's on the screen, and we're going to make it easy for you to grab it right there. I dropped it right there in the chat again. That's Trojans Wire. You can track Matt's work right there. And again, it's a fun podcast, and it's informational and insightful. And I've listened to both editions. Get Off My Pylon. That's Matt's work that comes out on College Gridiron. And I will let you know that I've got a podcast that comes out each and every week. We've had a little bit of a hang up for some reason for this week's edition, but we will let you know when the Big Ten paradigm will be dropped for this week. But let me look for I like to display all this visually as well. So here we go. Check out Matt's new podcast, Get Off My Pylon. Look it up on the College Gridiron Coast to Coast Network.
Also at patreon.com/Zemek. And, if you like that podcast, hey, just put a couple bucks in the tip jar, not asking for much of anything, just, tip money. Really, that would be absolutely fantastic. If I get $1 from 50 people, wow, that would be amazing from my point of view. Patreon.com/Zemek. Zemek. But hey, guys, visit the USC postgame show. Tony Altamore and his great graphics, Tim Prangley, LBC Trojan.
Yes.
It was a heck of a lot of fun last week. You want to be there at 8 p.m. Pacific or thereabouts, right after the Stanford game goes final. Going to have a good time here on the Voice of College Football USC postgame show.
I've been joking with Tony. I've said, you're either classing up the place with all these graphics and making me look good, or I don't know, maybe you're making me look bad because you're making all the rest of the shows look bad because, the graphics presentation from Tony is first rate. It's entertaining just to visually look at, but it's also insightful and really enhances the product. But between Tony, Tim, and LBC Trojan, great post game.
it's quality seeking out quality, which is like Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams going to USC, right? Quality seeks out quality. Tony Altimore, Mark Rogers, the voice of college football.
Matt, we appreciate you being here as always. We don't have a show without Matt, so please support his work there again at Trojans Wire and also at Patreon, Matt Zemek. So they can find you on Patreon. Just go to
Patreon/Zemek. Patreon.com/Zemek.
Perfect. All right. Awesome. Matt, enjoy the game. We know that you're going to be running around like a wild man as always with all the football and tennis going on this week and this weekend. So we appreciate it.
Thank you. And, I know you have your Iowa show coming up next. Boy, you get to talk about safeties and a total lack of offense. That's going to be a whole lot of fun. So enjoy that, Mark.
Well, if nothing else, for the time being, it's provided a punching bag that looks much like Brian Ferentz that I posted a video on that people seem to enjoy because they're watching it. So
you got to love that kind of content coming out of week one.
Yes.
All right, so Matt. Much, Mark. Thanks, everybody, for following us on the Voice of College Football. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.